So, welcome all to the first episode of our new Roundtable series here at Signify, which is in partnership with our podcast series, The Rusty Mic, which me and my colleague Matt, who head up the Rust department here in Signify, produce. My name's Jack. I specialise in recruiting Rust engineering professionals in the US, and Signify, who I represent, are an agency that specialise in recruiting Rust, Golang, Scala, data, and cloud engineering professionals globally, with my focus being Rust in the US, as mentioned. The title of the first episode of our Roundtable series is Unlocking Blockchain's Potential with Rust, speaking about the challenges, the advantages, and any other things within those topics. I'd like to start off by introducing our guests. So we have Michael, who is the VP of Engineering at FP Complete. We have Maida, who is the CTO of Casper Labs. And we also have Sharara, who is the CTO of Layer M. Obviously great to have all you guys on. I'd like to start off the roundtable event by you guys all doing like a brief intro into yourselves, how you got to where you are, and a little bit of background into your profiles and kind of what you guys do. With no further ado, Michael, would you like to start us off?
Sure, yeah, I can get started. So my name is Michael. My background, I actually did not start off working in the software industry. I started off in the insurance industry as an actuary. Gave me some financial background and some statistical background. I've been in the software space for, I guess, 15 years, full-time. A lot of that time actually at FP Complete, doing a lot of back-end engineering. At FP Complete, I ended up getting into the blockchain space about 8 years ago. We were building out blockchains, and since then, we have picked up Rust as our primary language. We have been moving deeper into the blockchain space and deeper into the smart contract space ever since.
Fantastic. Yes, Shara, if you want to go next.
Yeah, so I'm Shariar. Been working at blockchain chains for about 3 years now. Started off working on a DEX on Solana, and then from there realized, the limitations and worked on our own product. Otherwise, I've been working with Rust for like around 7 years now, so I've got a bit of experience there, and mostly my experience is in systems engineering. Yeah.
Fantastic. And then, lastly, Maida. Oh, I think you might be on mute.
Yeah, Meta Parlikar. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of Casper Labs, and we built the Layer 1 Casper protocol. Before that, I've worked in many large Fortune 100 companies as an engineering director. I started writing code and working with technology a very, very long time ago, the dawn of the internet in early 90s. And when we chose to build the Layer 1 protocol, we settled in on Rust. Because of its strong type safety, and it's memory safe, it's type safe, and it's really a solid language in terms of support both around the WebAssembly runtime. And we felt that this was like the best, up and coming language for us to double down on. So when we started building Casper in 2018, the engineers and myself decided that we were going to go all in on Rust.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Appreciate you all doing a little intro there, giving the people listening a bit of background into yourself, which is good. So obviously, as I mentioned, the title of the episode is obviously Unlocking Blockchain's Potential with Rust. Obviously, all of you have a background within blockchain and Rust as well. Obviously, asked you all to obviously prepare questions to ask each other and kind of discuss. Michael, I don't know if you want to get us underway with like the first thing you want to discuss with the panel in regards to the topic.
Sure, I could get started. I'm not sure if my questions are necessarily the best ones to get started with. I was going to ask about when we shouldn't be using Rust. Maybe someone else has a question that would work better for the beginning of this podcast, though.
Of course. I don't know if anyone else wants to start us off instead then with their question.
I could start. I'd be curious to learn what your guys' experiences have been with Rust smart contract development, in terms of adoption and some of the challenges around the Ethereum virtual machine and the traction that Solidity has.
I can get started with that. So most of the work that I've done, there's been some work in other chains, but most of it's been in the Cosmos ecosystem, where obviously Rust is the primary language for development. So there hasn't been much of an issue there. And then there is this trade-off between the big chains in the room are all doing Solidity. Do you double down on Solidity? Do you stick with Rust? Outside of, just that kind of market share question of where is the business, where are people actually going to use products? The huge advantage of being able to use a single language for the smart contracts, for the backend services, maybe even for the front end CLI tooling, that's great. The biggest downside that I've seen is simply the fact that not everyone out there is ready to start using Rust. And there's an automatic aversion to, maybe putting your core application logic into Rust. That said, I'm a huge believer in Rust. I think the type safety, many of the things that you called out, for me personally, type safety is the big one, the strong typing capabilities. The fact that that's all there, I think it easily pays for itself. Smart contract development in Rust, I also feel is much easier than many other domains of Rust development. When I do backend, when I'm dealing with async, lifetime issues, borrow issues, ownership issues in async is leaps and bounds worse than smart contract. So a lot of the time when people ask me about Rust, I do tell them smart contract development is probably one of the easiest places to get started.
Yeah, on my end, my main experience with smart contract development has been with Solana. And I would say the main difficulty there was actually not Rust by far, similar to what Michael mentioned, was actually the fact that the SDKs that are on Solana were not actually well designed around leveraging Rust. However, I would say that Rust is particularly good at smart contracts because the mutability. So in Rust, the fact you can like differentiate between like exclusive versus like shared references allowed you to basically allowed you to essentially provide like in Solana SDK you could actually like limit access to certain like data versus not, and that allows you to basically like unlock a lot of parallelism in the Solana ecosystem. So I'd say that's one of the strengths of Rust, especially in smart contracts. The main issue would be like how do you make ergonomic SDKs for developers with these like smart contract environments? Like for example, in Solana, you want to have easy access to fetching data from the blockchain and writing updates, also decoding data and stuff like that. Like all of that, when you're in Solidity, like all that's done for you. It's automatically decoded for you, and there's no like logic. Whereas in Solana, you can expect it to write your own logic for decoding and coding data and stuff like that. So that was the main barrier, I would say. It's the ergonomics, but otherwise Rust itself was probably like a big boon for development.
So I haven't done anything serious in Solana smart contract work. I'm surprised that that would be an ongoing issue. Is there a blocker to someone coming out there with, say, a helper crate that would paper over some of those issues?
Honestly, no, I think it's just the fact that I think most people in this space have not had enough experience with Solana to know how to make a good SDK out of it. The main SDK, I forget the name, I think it was Anvil. It was basically like it used a lot of magic around like meta programming to make it like somewhat ergonomic and somewhat similar to Solidity. But I think I think there's be a lot more work across the entire stack to make it more ergonomic. Yeah.
Interesting.
I'm curious
we're
if you.
finding. I'm sorry.
Oh,
Go ahead.
sorry. No, sorry. Go ahead.
So in our quest to attract developers to start building on Casper, what we found is that a lot of the real build devs, like the guys that are like guys and gals that are hardcore Rust developers that are used to building software in the way they always have, right? There's a very back-end engineers like yourselves, right? We find a lot of them are kind of like they're doing the sniff test as Web3. They're like, really? Like monkey memes? Like, guys, like, are you guys going to get serious about Web3 anytime soon? I feel like I get this feedback a lot from them when we start talking about smart contract development. Are you guys seeing the same thing with Rust engineers that they are still waiting for Web3, technology, Web3 itself to like gain some legitimacy and seriousness?
I've actually seen two different strands. There are some people out there who are very gung-ho in the current state of Web3, and then it seems like there's a large group of people who are just completely opposed to doing anything related to blockchain. Blockchain's a scam, blockchain is evil, they're going to steal your money, it's going to destroy the environment, whatever terms you want to throw in there. And I wouldn't say 50-50 split. I really have no idea what the numbers are, but I see those sentiments a lot, both in just browsing forums and when I'm putting out job job postings. A lot of the time, we will get people who are interested in a Rust post. And once you tell, I actually try to include crypto now from the beginning if it's going to be a crypto project, just because I would rather not waste people's time applying for a job that they're just going to reject immediately.
Yeah,
Well,
that's been what I found as well.
Yeah, just to chime in on that as well from a recruitment standpoint, just kind of putting my side in from the agency side is we did a poll the other day regarding Rust engineers and kind of what their thoughts are around like blockchain and getting involved. And one thing we saw, I think about 65% of people voted that they wouldn't. So I think it is a common theme in the market, and that's why I think talks like this are good to spread awareness within the Rust community as well. That's just one thing.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I mean, Casper and Casper Labs, definitely we've been focused on building real utility, real use cases, real applications using, the tooling set that you're used to using, on the Rust. Like we've doubled down, we're all in on the Rust ecosystem and building, native applications in Rust, Rust SDK, Rust smart contracts, the whole gamut, right? And it's yeah, I was just curious if that's just the sentiment that I'm seeing or if you guys are also seeing it too. Very interesting.
So I would add that I think blockchain is a space where, since it's so like young in a sense, there's a lot of really interesting and hard problems to work on, and it's the kind of problems that I think system engineers love to work on. So whenever I take that angle with like some of the people that we're considering hiring, like they get a lot more excited about the space because they see that the stuff they love doing, that's the reasons why they started learning Rust, systems engineering, where they can apply their skills at the most, especially like blockchain with distributed systems work, and hardcore like engineering work. I think from that angle, like people get very excited and they realize that the industry is very young right now, and that's why there's a lot of stuff going on. But I think down the line, like it's gonna be much more serious.
Fantastic. Yeah, I don't know if anyone else wants to come in next to their question that'll kind of chime in off the back of that, or if there's anything other that they want to discuss.
Well, actually, one of my follow-up questions, one of my questions that I'd forgotten about, what are some of the spaces outside of crypto itself that you guys are seeing any kind of adoption of blockchain? I've heard discussion, sales calls, discussions with partners, probably for going on 5 years at this point, of different potential blockchain applications. I know that logistics, shipping, those kinds of things are always being discussed. I'm curious which ones of those you've seen getting picked up.
Well, we're working on an AI governance product right now, right? So the blockchain becomes an immutable ledger for attestations and the data sets, right? So being able to roll back the AI to be able to detect hallucinations, to be able to detect problems in the underlying model and roll it back. When you start thinking about load-bearing software, load-bearing systems, you need some way to version control, version manage that, right? So the blockchain provides a fantastic infrastructure for that, right? So you can even do third-party attestations and know who did what when, and know that it's immutable, right? When the stakes are high, that's when people have an incentive to cheat. So this is a big use case that we're going after. We've also seen a lot around fractionalization of assets. We've seen track and trace for interesting use cases around digital assets and actually physical assets as well, where the custodial requirements for the asset are specific. So you can't do self-custody, right? So you'll see things like, gold fractionalization, where you're tracking who owns what bar of gold. So then you can buy, sell, and trade it without ever having to change the custody of the gold, right? The gold doesn't have to physically move. We've seen that with whiskey casks. We've also seen some interesting applications around IoT, where you integrate IoT with the blockchain to do more advanced track and trace, for like cold chain, as an example, right? So when the stakes are high, having the blockchain backing that up, like pharmaceuticals and mission critical items where you need to know that they arrived at a correct temperature, cold chain technology coupled with blockchain provides an additional security layer. And so like those are some of the use cases we've seen. I think blockchain, in addition to providing that immutable trust, it's a really, really great workflow tool, because you want to know who did what when, right? And the chain is really, really great at that. That transaction, auditing log, right? It's fantastic for that. Makes it very easy to implement something with a workflow tool.
And just building on that, one of the things that I've seen quite a bit, the ability of anyone to write a smart contract and deploy it to the same blockchain as some other smart contract you're already interacting with, gives us that ability to add in additional functionality that we don't have with typical software. Web 2 doesn't have the ability to go into whatever service you're dealing with outside of, making a few JavaScript tweaks within your browser. What was that old thing called? Grease Monkey, I think. I think Grease Monkey was the old, outside of those kinds of things where you can make some minor modifications, you can't really do anything more powerful. The ability in a blockchain to say, just add a multi-sig contract as the methodology for controlling funds, and then have that interact with anything else. Obviously, I'm still in the crypto space. I'm mostly on the DeFi side. But I do think that's one of those powerful value adds that we've barely begun to tap into.
Yeah, that's right. Like, the reason Casper has a very powerful multi-signature model. You can have up to 100 accounts and any kind of many-to-many relationship with weights and thresholds. And the reason we built it that way is if you look at any enterprise app, the most complicated thing is going to be your permissioning and group section. Like any enterprise app, you'll have this whole permissioning and groups module because there's tight governance around what happens in the enterprise, right? So we felt, well, what more powerful tool than to have a blockchain give you immutability around who did what when, right? Well, who signed what transactions, and then this multi-signature, complex multi-signature capability to govern the contracts themselves, right? And even with composability on chain, that gets extremely interesting. We built an on-chain package manager because we believe that real build devs will want the same ergonomics on-chain as they have off-chain, right? So you're going to want version contracts. You're going to want the protocol to version those contracts and strongly version those contracts for you so you can get some guarantees around what version you're pinning to when you're calling contracts on-chain, right? You don't want somebody upgrading the contract out from under you. So these are some of the core capabilities in Casper because it was really designed to be used in that kind of a production environment, right? Where the stakes are high.
That's really cool. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Yeah, a couple of areas as well where I've worked with businesses in the blockchain space. Just to add is you mentioned other things outside of cryptocurrency is like decentralized storage has been one, and like decentralized database as well. So yeah, that's just a couple of areas I've also contributed in regards to helping companies in the blockchain space. So it is being used in a number of different ways. Yeah, Shiara, I don't know if you've got a question or anything you want to put forward to the panel next.
Yeah, sure. Not as much of a blockchain question, but I found that a lot of engineers from, C backgrounds that have done a lot of systems engineering often struggle with picking up Rust because there's a lot more functional concepts that come into play as well. How do you guys manage, helping people learn those concepts on the job?
So I've actually done probably 6, maybe 7 Rust training courses up until now. Most of them, my background before Rust was in the Haskell world. And so I've trained a lot of people from the Haskell and the type, the functional paradigm and the strongly typed paradigm. There, you can imagine what the difficulties are. Why is there ownership? Why do I care about borrowing? Why, what's a system? What does memory mean? You can imagine those kinds of questions, and I'm exaggerating a bit. I did do one training course with a team of very advanced, very talented C++ game developers, and it was night and day. Some of them actually had already come to terms with a lot of the functional pieces of Rust, things like closures being everywhere. But that's probably one of the biggest pain points I've seen. This concept of using types in a much deeper way than you ever would in C and even in C++. The functional nature of the language, which again, it's not a functional language, but it has plenty of FP inspiration at the very least. I think those are probably the biggest two.
The leap that we've seen, so we always look at, when we initially started the project, we had a lot of Scala developers. Now they were doing pure FP in Scala. And then making the leap over to Rust, we chose idiomatic Rust in terms of, how the core protocol is written. So there's a lot of idiomatic Rust. And I would say it took the devs, several months to kind of ramp up onto Rust. And I think it's easier when they're pure FP guys. When they've done a lot of FP programming, it's much easier for them to onboard. And I would say the folks that are used to using declarative languages really struggle because I feel like Rust is a lot more imperative. That's one of the things also about Casper. Casper contracts are very imperative in their nature. And so you're issuing commands to the blockchain, which is a little hard for people to wrap their brain around, especially when they're used to using declarative languages, right? It's quite a leap for them to make.
I know when I was first making that leap from Haskell over to Rust, I was using closures in all the wrong places. It was just second nature. Everything is going to be functional. Everything is going to be a closure. You run into a million borrow issues and you think, oh crap, this Rust language, this is just a pain. Who wants to ever deal with this? Of course, once you as you say, idiomatic Rust, once you jump over and you figure that out, at least in my case, I ran into lots of pain points around borrowing and surprisingly dereferencing. The concept of dereferencing a pointer, even though I had I had plenty of a background in C and C++ before Haskell, probably Haskell converted me far too much towards this this less systems based approach. And I've seen similar kinds of things from Python, Ruby kind of developers also. So to some extent, I think that might, what I experience is probably the memory managed language versus Rust, C, C++ kind of approach, which has been another pain point. But that's actually the opposite of what you're talking about. That's one of those areas where C and C++ developers just grok it immediately and have no problems. And the rest of us are trying to figure out what exactly is this language trying to do.
So segueing off that then from a standpoint from some of the people who'll be watching this, it'll probably be something that they'll be interested in. So you're mentioning people who've kind of gone from C over to Rust. So another thing would be is say if someone, a developer within our network or something, was interested in blockchain and Rust, how would you, but they didn't have any experience in that area but wanted to get involved, how would you say would be the best avenue for them to get into that space and kind of find a role within that area? What would you guys be looking for from that side of things?
So I've brought on board at FP Complete some people who fit that kind of a description. Typically, I don't start them off on the direct blockchain kind of development. Typically, there's always going to be something that's not directly the blockchain. There's some kind of a backend service. There's some kind of data storage layer. Usually I start people off there, let them get comfortable with some simplified version of Rust initially. When I'm bringing people on board, one of the things I tell them is just clone everything. Just get used to cloning, throw an arc at it. Don't worry about it too much. You will figure out the ways to modify that over time. But once people feel comfortable that they're actually able to make progress and produce an application, then a lot of the angst goes down. Once people are comfortable with Rust, once they understand, again, another thing is just the blockchain paradigm. A lot of people just have no concept of what it means to work on a blockchain, how to interact with smart contracts, because it's, as much as I would personally say it's simpler than a lot of other distributed systems to write that kind of code, it is very different. And a lot of the concerns that you would have, oh no, I've got to lock this sorry, I've got to lock this variable, I've got to lock that variable, and then, and then modify things to avoid any kind of a race condition. In a lot of the different blockchain ecosystems, Cosmos being one of them, you don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. It simplifies the model. But you're always sitting there wondering, wait, this is a bug. That must be buggy code. There's no way that could be valid. And I've had a lot of PR reviews that end up with, no, that's actually fine, because any transaction that fails will just completely roll back. And I understand other blockchains don't do that. Just as one example, though, a lot of those kinds of issues do pop up when people are learning what's going on.
Fantastic. So yeah, obviously, Maida, have you got another question you want to ask or anything that you want to put forward?
I mean, in terms of onboarding developers onto Rust, we start them straight away with smart contract development, because as you guys have said, it's a lot easier for them to grok how to write a smart contract. It's a tiny piece of code, runs on the chain, and then they understand, okay, this is how I communicate with the chain. You basically put a transaction there, then you poll, right? And you wait for completion, and then you can perform some kind of process on your application side. So yeah, the communication with the blockchain is really the challenge, right? Is them understanding that it behaves slightly differently than a regular application.
There's also an interesting aspect of, I've never thought of calling it this, but the eventual consistency of all the different nodes in the network and needing to write defensively against old data. Those are some of those pain points that until you've actually worked on an application and run into, oh crap, I did a financial calculation based off of 2-minute-old data. Now I've lost $2 million, which thankfully has never happened to me, but is very possible and very easy to happen to people. Mm-hmm. Those are the pain points. And I think I would assume a lot of people who are sitting on the sidelines thinking about, should I get into blockchain? They may be somewhat intimidated. The same thing I think overall happens with Rust. A lot of people who are sitting there saying, I'm a good Python developer. I'm a Ruby guy. This thing of using Rust, and now there's no memory management. I don't have garbage collection. There's a little bit of terror that comes in for most people, I think, at that point. And if we can help people avoid that, help people understand, really, there's nothing to be worried about here. There are a few corner cases. We're going to document them, and then you can just get to work, which I think Rust does a great job. If you stick to safe Rust, you have very few things you have to worry about. And I think the same thing applies in a lot of blockchain development. Though there are those corner cases to be afraid of.
Yep, absolutely.
Fantastic. And does anyone else have any other questions that they'd like to discuss or anything else they'd like to put forward?
So I'll bring up that other question that I'd hinted at the beginning.
Yeah.
Rust is unique is too strong a term, but close to unique amongst languages in that you can use it almost everywhere. We haven't talked about, say, front-end development or other kinds of possibilities, but it's there. You can write essentially the entirety of any blockchain app on the right chains just with Rust. So I'm curious if you have any kind of experience of saying, no, we would avoid using Rust for certain domains, either within blockchain or even outside of blockchain. I'm very curious.
I mean, the reason we haven't used Rust in other areas really has been more of a recruiting issue than anything else. Like, I would say you're not going to find experienced front-end developers or dApp developers that are Rust only in terms of building UIs. Rust engineers just aren't interested in that. I feel like that's not their thing. So I think it's more around, the language itself has been validated to be really, really great for back-end development, for load-bearing, high-performance production systems, or alternatively, low-level device like firmware, right? And that's where people are using Rust, and those are the kinds of personas that it's attracting. And so if you want to build a UI, I think the reason you haven't seen that built in Rust is because Rust engineers aren't interested in building UIs. And so for that, we've fallen into, the traditional Node.js type of, engineers and for front-end development, and even for some of our middleware development, right? We have a Rust SDK. We actually are now doing a prototype of deriving our TypeScript SDK from our Rust crate. Like you basically pull in a Rust crate, and from that you create the TypeScript crate. NPM library, right? And so that it prevents duplicate development. You're not having to maintain two separate code bases. Basically, whatever falls out of the types, it just goes right into the Rust SDK, and boom, then you've got your TypeScript SDK falling right out of it. So we're finding that we're getting efficiencies from that, but still, like, you need to support TypeScript, you need to support JavaScript, and that still is the overwhelmingly load-bearing piece in our ecosystem as well, because people just like to build applications in that stack.
That specific thing of bridging the gap between Rust and TypeScript. We've gone through a whole bunch of investigations, and I think this has been across like 3 different projects. We always find some library that's able to take the JSON schema that was generated from Cerity and then convert that into TypeScript types or something else. And there's always something missing. There's some level of validation that isn't there. There's, Cerity is amazing. The fact that Cerity, I'm able to define a type, I get a schema, and it does full validation and gives me well-typed data at the end. That's what I want in TypeScript, JavaScript, I was going to say, but TypeScript. And I feel like I'm still missing some piece of that. So to me, that would absolutely be a holy grail if there's just this automated system. I wrote my smart contract. Here's the smart contract API. And boom, here's a TypeScript SDK that comes out of that. That's really cool.
Yeah, I would add that I find that overall, like even compared to dynamic languages, Rust is like probably one of the most productive languages. And having just one language for the whole stack is, very useful. So, in my experience, like even if Rust is not the single best fit, like having your entire code base in Rust is a pretty big benefit either way. The only place I would say it's not beneficial is when in certain areas like Rust has much less development. For example, as mentioned earlier, like front-end development, like Rust is pretty weak in that area. And in that case, you would probably pick language where there's been much more development, such as TypeScript, for example, right? I think generally, as Michael mentioned, like generally cross-language, cross-language interoperability is always like somewhat of a pain point. In my experience, what we've done is we've generally just stuck to tools that have that have been used for this purpose and are well tested. So in our case, we're using protobuf, and that has bridged the gap vastly. But yes, it is a pretty big pain point.
I'm still somewhat hoping for the day where we can use gRPC right in the browser. We're not there yet. I know we have
Yeah.
gRPC web and everything else, but not quite there yet.
I'm very nervous about depending on Google for anything, so we wrote our own.
Yeah, I can respect that decision.
Yeah, no, thank you. Decentralized. It was a hot decision though. People went back and forth about protobuf here. And we finally said, nope, we don't want to use protobuf. So we rolled our own. It was a lot of work.
Is that tied directly into Casper, or is that a general purpose data serialization format?
We created Bytes Repr, which is directly tied into Casper.
Okay.
Yep. We rolled our own all the way through the stack.
And have developers, companies, has anyone come to you and said, we want to build on Casper, but we can't do it with Rust. Can you help us out with another language? Has that happened?
No, it hasn't happened. It may have happened and I'm not aware of it, but people have not
Right.
come to me saying that we can't do it with Rust.
Right.
What we have heard is that there's a lot of because Casper contracts and the Casper FFI, it's very raw. Like you're coding directly against the contracts FFI. And so we've had members of the ecosystem put, syntactic sugar over it, right? And so you've seen a lot of these projects where they're putting a lot of syntactic sugar to make it easier. And the syntactic sugar is doing a lot of the lift, right? So there's an audra.dev framework that makes it even easier to build smart contracts on Casper, adding all that. But then the hardcore Rust developers, like the core devs, are like, well, I don't want to use that syntactic sugar. I just rather code directly against the FFI, against the contracts FFI, right? And do everything and control. Just depends how much control you want over how you're using the blockchain. So we feel like, you start off with the syntactic sugar as an easy onboarding. And then as you become more familiar, then you can eventually just write your contracts directly against the FFI, against the contracts API.
Almost sounds like the old framework versus library debate.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yep. We give both.
Seems like the right trade-off there.
Yeah. And
Also,
development's completely native. So we made development completely native to where you can actually run the contract against the execution engine, against the WASM runtime directly in your IDE. So a lot of other blockchains, and I don't know about Solana if Solana offers this, but you don't have to actually run an instance of a node in order to run the contract, right? So we believe that we want to have a total IDE based integrated development environment experience in Rust, right? So if you're building a full Rust application, you would theoretically with Casper be able to run it end to end right there in your IDE, because the contracts, you can actually set up the execution context, set up your starting state, install your contract, run all your tests, run all your scenarios, and then view the post state, right? You can do all of that directly within the IDE. And so we ship the execution engine as a crate as well in crates.io that you can use to basically run your contracts right there in your IDE.
I have seen similar kinds of testing frameworks before, but I don't think I've seen something quite to the extent you just described. That sounds very cool. I'll have to check it out later.
Yeah, do check it out later. Yeah. Yeah.
Brilliant. And does anyone have any other questions that they've still got to ask, or anything that they want to put forward as well?
I guess just one minor question for the backend services you're using. What tech stacks do you typically use? And I'll say from our side, Axum is currently the web framework of choice. There's not really a deep reason for it. We're in the Tokyo ecosystem. We're using Hyper and we're using Request. Axum going along with that, SQLX. All of those this whole set of tooling has turned out to be pretty good for I think about 6 or 7 different services across a few of our projects at this point.
Yeah, I'd say our current stack is like basically identical. Main reason is generally just developer ergonomics. Like I think Rust, just even the baseline frameworks are fast enough that what matters the most, in my opinion, is developer productivity. As well, I was at the fantastic tracing libraries. I think those are probably some of the best because we can just write our code to be, agnostic and then just plug in a backend and we have just, traces set up perfectly.
I found it very funny that you say, developer productivity is so important, which I agree with, by the way. I think most people have this impression that Rust is all about performance and all about speed. And then you actually get into Rust. Like, sure, it's fast, but I was able to get so much done so quickly. That's the thing that really gets me excited. Actually, to be fair, the thing that gets me excited is having a lower bug count. But productivity is right after that.
Yeah, we're using Tokyo as well. But in terms of like other pieces we're using, I mean, it's just mostly continuous integration, continuous deployment. We're not using a bunch of other tools in terms of the core protocol, right? As I said, we rolled our own. We didn't use protobuf, right? And even for our networking crate, we're going to be actually contributing to the blockchain ecosystem by coming out with a networking crate because we just weren't satisfied with OpenSSL. We couldn't find any Rust native networking, peer-to-peer networking crate that was secure, memory safe, and provably secure and memory safe. And so we're going to be publishing a crate called Juliet that will facilitate that. So we're very excited to be contributing back to the Rust blockchain Web3 ecosystem in that way.
Is that going to be used for like sharing blocks with other nodes, sharing the mempool? Is that the idea?
It's the base layer, the base communication peer-to-peer networking protocol. That's right. So
Forever,
message
okay.
transmission, back pressure. It's going to be basically message transmission and back pressure. Yep.
Cool.
Yeah.
That sounds exciting.
Yeah, because we just didn't find anything that was good. libp2p is garbage. Like it's just not good. So we felt like we needed to, add something to the ecosystem. Yeah, very excited about that.
Fantastic. Shar, is there anything else that you want to ask or anything else you want to put forward?
No, that's it on my end.
No, anything else from you, Maida?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
No. Yeah, one thing I'd say is obviously I mentioned before about how people will get involved. What kind of, from your guys' backgrounds, I know you mentioned that you're all in the blockchain space and you have been for a number of years. What kind of got you all interested in the blockchain space and what was kind of like your motivation to kind of move into that area from what you were doing previously? I don't know if you want to start, Michael.
Sure. I mean, so at FP Complete, we're a consulting organization. So my initial entry into the blockchain space was directly via consulting. We ended up building out a few blockchains for customers. We did audits. We did some application development. And I got interested in blockchain, but to be completely honest, I typically try to stay away from hype, which would be funny considering the fact that I've already mentioned Haskell blockchain and Rust as things that I've done. But maybe I learned my lesson. So now at this point, I typically try to avoid the hype. And when I initially got into blockchain about 7, 8 years ago, it was definitely at the point of being on the hype curve. I think hype at this point has mostly moved on to AI, and we're beginning to see the real technology of blockchain come in. So for the past 3, 4 years, I've been developing extensively, still for customer projects on blockchain, but I also took a new look for myself, and I am really convinced of a lot of the benefits the blockchain is able to bring. And maybe this is heretical to some of the people who are going to be listening. Even crypto, I'm a pretty strong believer that there's a real place in the world for cryptocurrency. So that's where I'm at now. And at this point, I actually prefer developing on blockchain than many other systems. Though to be fair, backend and cloud development is still probably where I'm most comfortable and happiest.
And you, Sharara?
On my end, I'd say I got into blockchain around 3 years ago, and what really got me into it was the fact that it was a fairly young ecosystem that's actually willingly adopting Rust across the entire ecosystem, like Cosmos, Solana, and all that. Casper Labs, for example, and that I think is really nice because like anywhere you go in the blockchain space, you will find really good like interesting blockchain work. Is going to be pretty interesting blockchain work as well. And especially that a lot of problems that are in the blockchain space are, very hard engineering problems. And so I think, it's a pretty, it's fantastic, like intersection of like strong engineers and people that, want to be in like a really young, thriving ecosystem.
Fantastic. And finally, Maida?
I got really interested in the problem that it's trying to solve. So basically the computer science problem, this notion of, the Byzantine generals problem and consensus, and the promise of the technology and what it can bring to the world, right? And I also I have I have this notion that there is a place for cryptocurrency, an alternative to, traditional forms of currency. I also feel that the cryptocurrency also has a role to play in securing these platforms and these protocols, right? It's like a really big carrot for, unethical black hats to go after the technology. So if you want to deploy technology in your infrastructure that's going to be load bearing, what better than the code base of a public protocol, right? Because it's been battle tested out there. It's like a whole new level of security that you see when you look at these public protocols and those code bases. It goes way beyond open source, right? And so, I mean, I got into the space 7 years ago, and yeah, I'm super excited for what the future holds. I think we're just getting started.
Fantastic. Does anyone else have anything else to add? No. Brilliant. Well, yeah, I'd like to say thank you all for obviously being the first guest on our roundtable series. Hopefully the first of many. If anyone watching wants to reach out to any of the guests today, I'll include all their social media, like LinkedIn links on the post. Feel free to reach out to them regarding potential roles, any questions you need. I'm sure these guys would be happy to answer. The post will be posted on our LinkedIn page for everyone to watch, also on our YouTube channel with everyone's links. So yeah, I want to say thanks to everyone for taking part today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for
Thanks for having us.
Cheers.
Thank you very much. Bye.